We made it through another year. 2021 is almost over, so it's that wonderful time of year where I look back at some of the best music released this year. This past year, and really the past few years, have felt like a decade, but throughout it all, bands and artists have been releasing music, touring when possible, and really persevering through these unprecedented times. So let's focus on the good, let's focus on the music as I take a look back at some of the best emo, pop punk, and punk rock of 2021. And just a note, the list is in no order. Turnstile, Glow On. One of the biggest bands in the hardcore scene give us a new album that you want to mosh to, but you also equally want to dance to. The band adds some new sounds into the mix, most notably shoegaze, I would say, like with songs like Underwater Boy. The reaction to this album really reminds me of when Turnover changed their sound with Peripheral Vision, which is an album, of course, everybody loved. There's been nothing but praise for Glow On online and in the hardcore scene. If you like hardcore at all and haven't checked out this record, I don't know what you're doing. We Were Sharks' New Low. The band is back with a very, very solid pop-punk album. Songs like Shameless, Bring Me Down, Ashley Part 2 are jams. I feel like We Were Sharks doesn't get enough recognition for what they're doing in the scene right now. They just don't get talked about as much as some of the other bands in the current pop-punk scene. You know, back in 2018, they released their album Lost Touch, and I put that on my list of one of the best albums of 2018, and I still think it holds up, and I think it's one of the best pop-punk albums in recent years. It just doesn't really get talked about that much. And with that album, and now with New Low, I definitely think We Were Sharks has solidified themselves as a pop-punk force. Pale Waves, Who Am I? Pale Waves is a band that really flies under the radar in my opinion. With this album and back in 2018 they released their phenomenal album, My Mind Makes Noises. They're a pop-punk band, definitely more on the pop side, but they do both so well. This year the band released Who Am I, and it really just expands their 2000s pop-punk vibes. Songs like Change, She's My Religion, and Easy are jams, and they get stuck in your head immediately. If 2000s pop-punk and pop rock are your thing, Pale Waves is a band you need to check out. Every Time I Die, Radical. Honestly, I was never the biggest fan of Every Time I Die, but I heard everyone talking about this album, so I gave it a listen, and I am glad that I did. Whether you describe this record as blistering, impactful, intense, extreme, it all works because this record goes 100 miles per hour the entire time. It does not let up. The best way that I can describe this album is as thrash punk. It's crazy guitars, crashing drums, screaming vocals. After listening to the whole album, I had to take a moment and assess my situation because this record is just all over the place in the best possible way. All you need to do is listen to the scream at the end of All This and War, and you really get a feeling of what this record is all about. And it's not just the intense sound that makes this album stand out in the scene, it's the lyrics as well, with one of my favorite lines being from Planet Shit, "What kind of death can you buy that's any different than mine?" Radical is easily one of the highlights of the year. It's an intense, impactful, and insane album. See You Space Cowboy, The Romance of Affliction. This is another intense record, and whether you call it metalcore, screamo, or post-hardcore, from the first song to the last song, this record grabs your attention and doesn't let go. The album has both screaming vocals and more clean vocals, and it's just a personal taste for me, but I'm always more of a fan of the clean vocals, so songs like Arms That Bind, The End, and My Faded Reflection are some of my favorites. There's a reason everyone in the scene is talking about this album, and that's because it shreds. If you haven't checked it out, please do. Meet Me at the Altar, Model Citizen. Now, a lot has changed with Meet Me at the Altar since I first talked about the band on the channel back in August of 2020. The band exploded onto the scene, signed with Fueled by Ramen, and more importantly, has been embraced by the scene. They released Model Citizen this year, and it's a great blend of pop, punk, and easycore, and it's taken over the scene in a way that I haven't seen in a long time. The band's song, Feel a Thing, is a jam. It's something I've been listening to all year. Now or Never is another one of my personal favorites. I've said it before on the channel that it's rare when the punks can agree on something, and it's clear that Meet Me at the Altar is set to do some big things. Oxymorons, Mohawks, and Do-Rags. Self-described as alternative rock mixed with hip-hop, the band has one of the most unique sounds in the scene, and Mohawks and Do-Rags is easily one of my favorite releases of the year. Rest Easy, Bad Ideas. One of the best hardcore EPs of the year. Go and listen to the title track off this EP and bask in the glow of one of the best hardcore songs of the year. I can't wait for the band's new record. Kenny Hoopla, Survivor's Guilt. If you like pop punk and haven't listened to Kenny Hoopla yet, I don't know what you're doing. His song Estella is a pop punk juggernaut, and I'm very interested to see how Kenny can impact pop punk in the mainstream going forward. With those last three bands, I talked about them in a recent video, so go check that out to learn more about them and other bands I'm excited for in 2022. Magnolia Park, Halloween Mixtape. This is a band I've talked about on the channel before, and since then they've signed to legendary label Epitaph and have really made an impact on the scene. The band released a Halloween mixtape this year, and it's just pop punk bliss. I love the acoustic guitar on the end. 2009 and 2010 are some of my favorite songs. There's some 2000s pop punk. There's some more modern pop punk vibes as well. Sick of It All holds a special place in my heart because that's the first song I heard from the band. It's just good stuff all around. Magnolia Park do a great job of mixing old and new sounds, and I think the Halloween mixtape is one of the year's definitive releases. Olivia Rodrigo, Sour. This is a massive album, and as far as discussion within the alternative music scene about what albums made an impact this year, we have to talk about Sour. I mean, Good For You has to be one of the most popular pop punk songs in recent memory. I can't tell you how many of my friends who aren't into the alternative music scene came up to me this year and were like, Mike, you gotta check out this awesome new pop punk song. So yes, I have heard it, and it's great. From Brutal to Good For You, there's punk and pop punk influences front and center on Sour. Now, a lot of the record is pop music, and if that's not for you, fine, but the pop music on Sour is great. Traitor is my personal favorite. It's going to be very interesting to watch Olivia Rodrigo and see what she does next. Does she dive more into the rock and pop punk style, like we've seen with other mainstream artists like Machine Gun Kelly, like Poppy? I think it's safe to say, if there is another pop punk revival, that Olivia Rodrigo is going to be a part of it. Jeff Rosenstock, Ska Dream. A ska-fied version of his 2020 album No Dream, What's Not to Like. The new songs all flow well, and it's always great to get new music from the legendary Jeff Rosenstock. Now, there's also talk about a ska revival, and there are a ton of new ska bands that I've covered all over the channel, but you really can't have a ska revival without Jeff Rosenstock. Poppy, Flux. Poppy has always dabbled with a bunch of different sounds, but on this album, Poppy really settles into that alternative rock vibe, and I loved it. So Mean instantly gets stuck in your head. Her starts off kind of more mellow, and then the screams come in, and Lessen the Damage is really just a straight up punk song, and you can't go wrong with that. I talked earlier about the pop punk revival, or really just pop punk getting back into the mainstream, and while Poppy isn't really in-your-face pop punk like some of the other bands I talked about, Poppy really needs to be mentioned as someone who is helping alternative music get back into the mainstream. Safe Face, another kill for the highlight reel. This album has really taken over the scene. There are days where my Twitter timeline is just nothing but Safe Face. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about this album and how it sounds, and a lot of comparisons to legendary bands in the scene. A quick Google search will bring up a lot of people comparing the sound to this album to My Chemical Romance, and I definitely agree with that statement, but I really don't think it impacts the album, at least not in a negative way. I also hear Say Anything moments on the album, Panic at the Disco moments on this album, and it really doesn't hurt the album, at least not for me. I mean, they're a band in the alternative music scene taking influences and inspiration from some of the most prominent and legendary bands in the scene. That kind of makes sense to me. With all the bands I mentioned, including Safe Face, they do such a great job of making their songs more epic and anthemic than a normal short punk rock song sounds and feels like. There are great songs on this album, like the title track and Sharpen Your Teeth. 2021 has clearly been Safe Face's year, and I personally can't wait to see what the band does next. Pink Shift, Saccharine. The band released I'm Gonna Tell My Therapist on You last year, and it took over the scene, and this year they released their debut EP. This is great in-your-face punk rock. I'm Gonna Tell My Therapist on You is a song I come back to all the time. It has over 3 million streams on Spotify, so I think it fits under our classification as a massive song within the scene. Agi, the Idol Opus. This is one of the most unique albums released in the scene this year, and you might not have heard about it. And that might be by design. Let me explain. Agi is a band with almost no digital presence, no real social presence. The album doesn't really have any online marketing, just a few posts here and there from the label Triple Crown. The album is on streaming services, but the only digital chatter about the album is from music nerds like you and me. So let's dive into the Idol Opus. The album is a concept album that flows more like a play than anything else. The concept is really a coming-of-age love story, but there's so much more to dive into. The band worked on the album from 2016 to 2019. The album comes in of a total runtime of about an hour and a half. The shortest song on the album is about 5 minutes, and the longest song on the album's closer, is 17 minutes. The album doesn't marry itself to one genre. The band even sang mediums, not genres, on their Bandcamp page. There's emo, there's pop, there's folk, there's indie, there's moments of anthemic bliss, there's instrumentals, and everything just flows so well. I mean, just take a look at all the musicians credited on this album. This is a massive album, and you can dive into the story and concept of the album as much as you want. And with every song, the band impressed me more and more. And while it's obviously a long listen, this is one of the most unique releases in the scene this year. Those were some of my favorite releases of the year. Let me know yours down in the comments below. Also, make sure to check out the description for a Spotify playlist that has music from all the bands and artists I've talked about, and I'll also throw in anything else that I found interesting that I listened to this year. Before I go, I do want to say a quick thank you to everyone who stuck with me and the channel this year. To subscribers old and new, thank you. And you can expect 2022 to be a really fun year. Please subscribe if you haven't, like the video, tell your friends, and as always, thanks for watching.